Hey everyone, and welcome. So, if you've ever found yourself wondering where exactly the line is between just a bad thought and an actual punishable crime, you are in the perfect place. And hey, if you've got criminal law exams coming up, you're going to want to listen closely because mastering this concept is absolutely essential. Today, we're breaking down the 4 stages of a crime.
It really all boils down to this one single powerful question. At what exact moment does a secret intention become a public crime that the law can actually get its hands on and punish? That fine line is exactly what we're here to define today.
All right, here's our game plan. We're going to explore what's often called the ladder of liability. We'll start with just the intention, move through preparation and attempt, and land on the final accomplishment. Then, we'll wrap up with the key legal tests that you absolutely need to nail for your exams.
I want you to think of it exactly like this ladder. Each step you take gets you closer to the completed crime, right? And as you climb, criminal liability becomes more and more certain. Intention is basically the ground floor, and accomplishment, well, that's the very top. Okay, so let's start at the very bottom of that ladder with stage 1, intention. You can think of this as the seed from which pretty much every crime grows. So, intention is purely a state of mind. It's that moment someone thinks to themselves, okay, I am going to do this. It's a psychological stage where the plan is born, but not a single physical action has been taken yet. And this is exactly why it's so tough for the law to deal with. I mean, how do you prove what's going on inside someone's head? It's incredibly challenging.
And because of that difficulty, the general rule is actually pretty simple. You can't be punished for your thoughts alone. The law just doesn't prosecute thought crime. There has to be some kind of action, what we call the actus reus, for a crime to even occur. But, and listen, this is a huge but for your exams, there are some very important exceptions.
And here they are. These are the critical exceptions you just have to memorize. Under the Indian Penal Code, certain intentions are seen as so dangerous to the state itself, we're talking things like waging war or sedition, that the law simply doesn't wait for an action. The mere conspiracy, the intent alone, is punishable. All right, let's climb one rung up the ladder. This brings us to stage 2, preparation. This is where that thought starts to bleed out into the real world, into actual action. So, preparation just means getting the tools for the job. Buying the poison, getting the weapon, scouting out the location. It's the bridge between deciding to commit a crime and actually starting to commit it. Now, what's interesting is that even at this stage, the law is still a bit hesitant. The general rule is that preparation is also not punishable. And why is that? Well, because you could still change your mind. And think about it from a prosecutor's point of view. How can you possibly prove that the poison was for a murder and not just for rats in the basement? And this case illustrates the point perfectly. Look, Ram has the intention, and he's made the preparation. He has the means to do it. But until he takes that one step further, the law can't touch him. It would be nearly impossible for the prosecution to prove beyond a reasonable doubt what he was actually planning to do with that gun. But just like we saw with intention, there are some major exceptions here too. For really serious offenses that threaten the very fabric of society, like preparing to commit dacoity, which is armed robbery by a group, or counterfeiting currency, the law steps in and makes the mere preparation a crime. Seriously, this is exam gold right here. And this brings us to the toughest and honestly the most tested question in this entire topic. What is that dividing line? Where does getting ready to do something end and actually starting to do it begin? This distinction is absolutely everything. So here's the crucial point. Preparation is all about arranging the means, but an attempt is a direct step towards the crime. During preparation, you can still back out. An attempt, on the other hand, is considered the point of no return. This is where criminal liability truly kicks in for most offenses. Which brings us to the third, and I'd say most critical, rung on our ladder, stage 3, the attempt. This is where an action finally becomes a punishable crime in the eyes of the law. So, an attempt is any act that goes beyond just getting ready. It's that moment the offender begins to carry out their intention. They've started the engine, and now they are actively driving towards the commission of the crime.
This quote right here really reveals the core logic behind why we punish attempts. The law recognizes that even a failed attempt causes real harm because it creates fear and a sense of threat in society. And crucially, it sees the moral guilt of the person who tried and failed as being basically identical to the person who actually succeeded.
Now, this brings us to a tricky exam favorite, the impossible attempt.
In this classic example, A tries to steal from an empty box. Now, even though it was literally impossible for him to succeed, he's still guilty of an attempt. Why? Because he had the criminal intent, the mens rea, and he took a direct action, the actus reus. The only reason he failed was because of circumstances beyond his control, not because he had a change of heart.
And finally, we've reached the top of the ladder. Stage 4, the accomplishment, or the actual commission of the crime. This is where the intended act is successfully completed. This slide makes the distinction crystal clear. In both of these scenarios, the intent, the mens rea, and the action, the actus reus, are identical. A fires a gun at B. The only difference is the outcome. If B is only injured, it's an attempt to murder. But if B dies, the crime is accomplished, and it becomes murder. That final result is what determines the ultimate charge.
So we've climbed the whole ladder, but how do courts actually decide which rung someone is on? Especially that crucial, fuzzy line between preparation and attempt. Well, that brings us to the most practical part of this whole explainer, the key legal tests you'll need for your exams.
Okay, here are the 3 main tests courts use. First, we have the proximity rule. This one's pretty straightforward. It just asks how close the person was in time and space to actually completing the crime. Were they just buying the tools a week before, or were they outside the bank with the getaway car, running? Second is the doctrine of locus poententia, which is a fancy Latin way of saying opportunity to repent. Essentially, the law asks if the person still had a clear chance to back out. Once they pass that point, it becomes an attempt. And finally, there's the equivocality test. This asks if the action, just viewed on its own, unequivocally points to the crime. Could there be any other innocent explanation for what they were doing? If the answer is no, it's very likely an attempt.
And we'll leave you with this final thought to debate. We know that the law often punishes an attempt less severely than a completed crime, like under Section 511 of the IPC. But if the moral guilt, the intention, and the action are exactly the same, is a lesser punishment really justified just because the offender got lucky and failed? That's a question that gets to the very heart of why we punish crimes at all.